But you do need an element of government, which even if it doesn't do everything, it's a partner with the private sector. It creates an enabling environment. And the economic reality of South Africa is that for the past 15 years, our economy has not been able to exceed the growth of the population. That's if you want Gauteng's urban crunch problem in a sentence, it's that population growth exceeds economic growth.
Looking forward now with the prospect of becoming mayor again, are there certain things that stand out to you as high priorities that ought to be focused on?
There are good people in politics. That most of us are largely focused on how to fix the system and to deliver value for money. How do you get rid of a corrupt head of tenders? How do you make sure that good businesses put in bids? How do you make sure that the majority of your money goes to substations and water treatment plants and roads? It's not about, planning the next junket or how to enrich yourself. There are obviously a core, and most of them are under the banner of the ANC. But just because there are some of us working in a system that looks like it's failing, doesn't mean that we are perpetuating a failing system. In many instances, if it wasn't for our intervention, things would be a whole lot worse.
Yeah.
Because if we're honest about it, the ANC continues to be the problem. MK is a massive risk to the future of the country. EFF is a risk. But the ANC still has its embedded cadres and its networks of corruption. And we have to ground the ANC into the dust, or at least weaken them to such an extent that there is a chance to deliver on an agenda that is not ANC directed.
Cilliers Brink, welcome and thank you very much for joining us on the podcast again.
Great to be here. Thank you very much, Ernst.
So last time we spoke, you were the mayor of Pretoria, and since then there were some ruptions and you're not the mayor anymore, but it does seem, firstly from your plans, that you were planning to make a comeback, and it does seem from opinion polling and so forth that it seems very probable that you will be the mayor again. Is that going to happen? Are you going to be the mayor again, or how do you see things playing out?
Well, I think the extent of the instability in metro politics in particular, where you have this revolving door of mayors, and each one has their own agenda, and then they're removed or the coalition falls apart, is very bad for the cities. You can't get anything done. You can't get a grip on the administration. Because remember, what we essentially inherited when the first ANC mayor was removed from power was a municipal administration with ANC cadres. And in terms of the ANC policy of cadre deployment, which was adopted at Mafikeng in 1997, they deploy party agents in civil service positions. So even though the ANC loses an election, they have politicians embedded in the system. So if you have a constant turnover of mayors, the political authority that you have as mayor starts to be eroded. And then the administration just continues as before, and it becomes very difficult to break those networks of corruption or to steer the city administration in a different direction. So my calculation was stick around. The coalition which we had with a party called Action SA, that coalition fell apart, and that party switched its allegiance from a DA-led coalition to an ANC-led coalition in exchange for the mayoral position. But that was not the electorate. The voters haven't spoken. And so sticking around, I think, is good to restore a sense of continuity. And hopefully the election results, and as you mentioned, the opinion polls are looking good. Hopefully the election results will give us that opportunity, because that's what we need, a stable platform on which just to do something. And we don't want to revolutionize anything. We just want to make sure that the system doesn't crumble. And that you restore things so that you get investment, so that people can get value for taxpayers' money. And so that there's a sense that the ANC doesn't destroy everything as it implodes. So there must be life after the ANC. And that to me is very important.
So in your planning then, in terms of the DA, of which you're a representative at large, but especially also for the city, do you think in terms of how are we going to deal with things after the ANC implodes, or isn't a factor anymore? Or how do you foresee that playing out with the ANC and the future of the ANC?
So talking about the city in particular for a moment, the indications are that it will be possible for the DA and like-minded parties who used to get along with each other in the coalition, and I would account the Freedom Front Plus and the ACDP as two parties who did get along. It is a very strong possibility that we will be able to form a coalition without having to think about a government of local unity. Because if we're honest about it, the ANC continues to be the problem. MK is a massive risk to the future of the country. EFF is a risk. But the ANC still has its embedded cadres and its networks of corruption. And we have to ground the ANC into the dust, or at least weaken them to such an extent that there is a chance to deliver on an agenda that is not ANC directed. So that is the goal, Ernst. We will see how the election turns out. Opinion polls, as you know, they change. They're just a snapshot. They're not a prediction. And the big risk is to get complacent about these things, so that we don't take anything for granted. It is incredibly important for us that the residents of Pretoria, the capital city, the greater Tshwane metro, that if you want something different from the ANC, if you want to break this coalition chaos, register, go and vote. Even if you don't, even if, like you're a skeptic of the constitutional system, just get registered, go and vote, and let's continue to push the ANC to way beyond where they currently are.
So we recently published a report on what we call the many commissions of Cyril Ramaphosa. And in our report, we outline at least 34 commissions that he has started since he became the president. And one of the conclusions in the report is that the system, you mentioned our skepticism towards the system, but that the system, in a sense, incentivizes bad decision-making or incentivizes bad policies. And what we mean by that is it's sort of a bigger picture phenomenon. To a large extent, you could say that the president knows who the corrupt cadres are, and the cabinet knows, and the prosecuting authority knows. But instead of prosecuting them, they start the Zondo Commission to investigate it even further. And
interestingly, that's also what Julius Malema says. Julius Malema these days, he doesn't win votes, he just holds press conferences.
Yes.
And that was his opinion. He says, this latest commission into police corruption, Ramaphosa's bet is that you'll just drag it out, the public will forget, and it becomes like a distraction. So it's an interesting interlude.
So we can make a list of all the things we agree on with Julius Malema.
Interesting. Yeah.
But the point is that if he, and I'm going to draw it back to Pretoria now, but if the president were to start prosecuting cadres who are very senior in the ANC, the problem is it will probably be the end of his political career. If he says, like you recently wrote a piece in the Sunday Times on this as well, but if he says that cadre deployment is bad for the country, we have to stop this policy or reverse it, he's going to get kicked out. So part of the problem is that the system rewards him for making bad decisions or for not making the appropriate decisions, at least the system in terms of the role with the context of the ANC. But my question is you can comment on that, but also does that translate into local politics as well, where especially if you have these alliances and coalitions where in a certain sense you can't make the decisions that ought to be made, because if you do so, it's the end of your career. How does one manage that?
Yeah, let me just say something about Cyril Ramaphosa. I think that the days when we gave him an alibi to say he can't make the difficult decisions because then he'll be voted out, those days are long gone. I mean, this is a guy that, despite his own murmurings, despite Pala and the scandals, got a very strong mandate at his last party congress. All of the stories about how his authority was going to be challenged, all of that came to naught. And I think that's an important dynamic in our politics. Ramaphosa was at the zenith of his powers just before the election. He could have even used the opportunity of a GNU to say, let me count the DA's votes and the ANC's votes together and claim a mandate for reform. So you tell your party, listen, we had this program of action. It didn't work. The electorate has punished us. And now we have to work with these guys and adopt some of their economic policies, achieve some supply side reforms, take some of the obstacles out of the way of investment, fixed investment, growth and jobs. And he has just been the master of excuses and of lost opportunities. So he hasn't even tried, Adams. So I wouldn't even grant him that alibi. He's a weak leader. He's got no vision. He's got no proactive agenda. He's a time server at this stage. And I think history will confirm that. As to the situation at local government level, it is, as you say, incredibly difficult because you've got a very politicized municipal administration. And you notice in parliamentary committee meetings, and I was on this committee for local government. So you do these interviews with the mayor and municipal manager of Piet Sonnewater or some dysfunctional municipality somewhere in the Free State or the Northwest. And then you realize that the real political operator isn't in fact the elected mayor, but the municipal manager or the city or the municipal treasurer. So the formal political system has been subsumed by the structures of the ANC and this network of cadres. And then they push forward somebody who is hardly able to articulate themselves or to understand complicated municipal processes. And that has really disabled the ability of even serious and sincere elected officials to make changes. There is a resistance, and the more divided the politicians are, the more hung councils, the more chaotic the coalitions, and this is a point I made in the introduction of the first answer, the more these officials then play politicians off against each other. And one example would be here in the Tshwane Metro, where we had a municipal manager by the name of Moeketsi Mosola, who, when he had to be investigated for tender irregularities, a company by the name of Glad Africa, Salim Simanga was the mayor. When the municipal manager was then investigated, he played off the different parties in council against each other. And the decision to act against a senior official in the council is a vote of the municipal council. So he could block that vote by playing off the different factions in the council against each other. So it's difficult, but listen, it's not impossible. It is not impossible. It can be done. In the Tshwane Metro, we recruited a very good civil servant by the name of Johan Mettler, who's got an impeccable record of good governance and standing up to corruption. Him and I have had many differences when I was mayor, as do all elected officials and civil servants. You know, the whole minister dynamic that plays out between bureaucrats and politicians. But I do think that the changes that we put in place in the city give us at least a basis on which to build.
So what are some of the things that you were involved with as mayor that you believe were most important? I remember we spoke about some of that in our previous discussion about a year ago, but the reason why I ask is, looking forward now with the prospect of becoming mayor again, are there certain things that stand out to you as high priorities that ought to be focused on?
Well, absolutely. Just to reflect on what we got right. I think it's Peter Drucker who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And culture can be broadly defined as a set of norms and standards, very often inarticulate. It's not spoken, but it's understood by behavior. And the important cultural change or challenge for us came when, out of financial necessity, not because anybody wanted to be, like a Margaret Thatcher or, tried to pick a fight with trade unions. Nobody, by the way, wants to be in that position, I can tell you that. But the point is that at a critical period just after my election, the city had gotten so far behind on the Eskom bill that very difficult decisions had to be made. And the least disruptive decision that we could have made, the least harmful one, was to forego salary increases in one financial year. Not downgrade posts, not retrench people. That's pretty much unheard of in municipalities.
Yep.
Just to go to the bargaining council and rely on a provision in the agreement that says if a municipality can't afford to pay increases, they can seek exemption.
Yep.
That was eventually upheld in the Labour Court, believe it or not. I had a senior counsel, somebody I respect a great deal, who told me, settle, because you're never going to win in this system, because labour laws are written against the employer. Nonetheless, that case was eventually won. But it came at the cost of standing up to a 3-month-long violent and an oftentimes criminal strike where infrastructure was smashed, where people were intimidated, where I was pressured by coalition partners like Action SA to essentially cave to the unions, despite the fact that both the ANC and Action SA had in fact supported the budget and the exemption application. And the cultural change there was to say, we will not tolerate crime and violence as bargaining chits.
Yep.
And I believe that stand, although it was disruptive, it was financially beneficial. We saved 600 million rand in that one financial year, but of course, increases escalate.
Did you say 600 billion?
600 million. 600 million. Yeah,
rand.
if we had 600 billion, Pretoria would look a whole lot different. The whole budget is about 50.
Yeah.
But 600 million rand in that first year, but of course it escalates. And why it is important, why salaries are important, is because after Eskom bulk purchases, we buy electricity from South Africa's energy monopoly and then resell the electricity. That's your biggest operational expense. After that comes salaries. So if you're in financial trouble, if you can't pay Eskom, what are you going to cut? You're going to cut on your salary bill. And that we did. And that difficult decision also enabled a favorable payment arrangement with Eskom. And that's very important because as a municipality, as a big city, you want credit worthiness so that you can approach the capital markets and raise funds to build infrastructure. If you can't build infrastructure, you are stuck in a service delivery doom loop where you can't upgrade things. So that, I believe, was important for a cultural change, but also financial benefit. The other important thing which we undertook, it wasn't a political decision, it was the decision of the city manager, Metler, was to act with unusual resolve in trying to dismiss, as difficult as it is, to dismiss people. 5 officials implicated in the awarding of an irregular tender for the upgrade of the Rooiwal wastewater treatment plant, including the head of supply chain management tenders and the head of water in the city. And this tender had been awarded to Blackhead Consulting, a company that belongs to Edwin Sodi. He didn't have the construction industry grading to do the job, and lo and behold, he walked off site before the work was complete. And Metler acted with absolute resolve in investigating the matter. He took his time investigating the matter, first suspension, and now the matter is also in the Labour Court to get those folks fired and also to get Sodi blacklisted so that he can't do business with government. And it's very important to realize how big deal Sodi is to the ANC. This is one of their big backers. You can still see him at birthday parties of ANC leaders in Gauteng and so forth. And those are the type of difficult decisions we undertook. But looking to the future, it has to be a stabilized financial position so that we can once again build infrastructure. And Adams, this is a concluding remark and a very long-winded answer. If you look at the capital budget of the city of Cape Town, it's 9 billion. It is accumulated over many years as the result of good financial management. And capital budget tells you what a municipality can spend on substations, wastewater treatment plants, roads, stormwater, the physical stuff that delivers the services, that gives businesses the confidence to build factories and warehouses, and that makes a city a nice place to live. So around about 9 billion Cape Town's capital budget. It was about the same as Tshwane's back in 2006. Today, Tshwane has a capital budget of just about 2 billion. And that shows you the difference, the chaotic politics that has happened in the city. And we have to restore the city to a position where it can accumulate a capital budget, spend it on infrastructure, and of course, the most important is to actually get value for that spending.
I want to take a moment to thank you for watching and following the content on this channel. And I also want to encourage you to like this video and to subscribe to this channel to ensure that our audience is broadened. That's maybe a good segue to some questions I have to you in terms of bigger picture politics, and we've discussed some of this. So you mentioned Cape Town, and there's this whole movement with regard to the Western Cape and some questions about more authority or more autonomy for the Western Cape, and that could take different forms. What is that dynamic like with a city like Pretoria when we talk about the need for decentralization, for example? How do you see that relationship between a city like Pretoria, which is the capital city, and the union buildings, which is in Pretoria, or the executive authority?
I believe in a principle called functional federalism. You build up capacity and you start doing the work that national government has left by the wayside, and that puts you in a favorable position to, in effect, reinterpret the constitutional relationship. You and I have spoken in a different context about this, de facto devolution of powers. And Cape Town is an incredibly strong position to deploy their own law enforcement officers. I mean, if you have visited, somebody that you have to talk to is a guy called J.P. Smith, Cape Town's member of the Mayoral Committee for Public Safety, who has held that position for a long time, longer than any politician has ever held a position in Pretoria, Johannesburg, or Gauteng. But the point is, they have built the law enforcement capacity in that city that rivals that of the South African police at the height of its powers. CCTV cameras, body cams, dash cams, eye-in-the-sky drones, the capacity to build electronic dockets so that you don't have to fear somebody losing a docket at the magistrate's court. They can open a phone and it looks like the Uber app, and you can see there's the police car at the corner of 2nd and 3rd in Mitchell's Plain, and then the dispatch center can say, okay, we send that Metro police car to attend to an incident of domestic violence or whatever. They aggregate the intelligence from this, as does New York or whoever's good. I'm not sure if New York is still a good example. Maybe in the 90s, no longer. So the level of the sophistication in Cape Town, if they can get some of the money that national government has, will be an absolute game changer. I am convinced that Cape Town under DA government, with the necessary funding, plus the capacity that they've already built, they can beat gang violence. But the point for Pretoria and the rest of the country is you have to have functional federalism. You can only demand for the devolution of powers if your own systems work, if your own metro police work, if you've got the cars, if you've got a dispatch system. And I believe that it becomes an important motivation for folks to not let things go to hell outside of the Western Cape. So there might be skepticism about the system, about government, about taxation. But if we want a measure of devolution, we've got to build some local capacity. I understand completely that it's not just about state capacity. We have got such sophisticated security companies and arrangements, for instance, in Pretoria. I mean, the east of Pretoria, if you compare the crime stats from the 90s to now, it is a sea change. I mean, the streets of Pretoria East, for example, have been taken back from criminals. And that hasn't been the South African police, that's private security. But you do need an element of government, which even if it doesn't do everything, it's a partner with the private sector. It creates an enabling environment. And that's important to me. As before, we'll take hands with the private sector. We'll share information. We'll never pass a bylaw like Joburg has tried to do, where you try to regulate the private use of CCTV cameras. We'd rather try and work with CCTV camera operators and private security companies. But you need a government who's open to doing that.
So as a politician and someone who's involved with government or local government, how do you see this triangle? Because I don't think it's just public sphere and private sphere, there's also what you could describe as community sphere, like people driving, doing neighborhood watches and so forth.
Stuff that's not for profit, that's not
Exactly.
making money.
Yes. And so in a certain sense, the government's doing a lot of things, and you might think, or theoretically at least, the statist idea tends to want to grow itself by definition. So the state wants to get bigger and bigger, at least
and
theoretically.
crowd out the other players.
Yeah, exactly. How do you see that role between the government and private companies fulfilling certain functions and then communities becoming more involved? Is that a threat to the state, or is it an opportunity?
You can have one of three approaches as government to the reality of state failure and a civil society which is becoming more organized and more capable using technology to step into the void left by the state. One of three. You can refuse next state, try and block the private sector. And by the way, Aaron, I don't think that distinction between commercial and community is that sharp. I think in many instances, the private sector, whether for profit or community, people want nice things, people want safe communities. The little platoons, whether they're commercial or non-commercial, they fulfill a similar function. So you can have a refusenic attitude to civil society and using commercial partners. And I think that was exemplified by the approach of government to Eskom. They wanted to preserve Eskom's monopoly. To a certain extent, certain players in government still want to preserve Transnet's monopoly. To take it to a community level, the EFF member of the mayoral committee here in the Tshwane Metro for Environment, who says that AfriForum can't cut the grass.
Yeah.
You can do that, but it's clear that has failed because the state's capacity is not going to be enhanced, and you're not going to be able to get that existing capital and goodwill. Goodwill, that's the essential thing. People want good things for the communities in which they live. So the second approach would simply be to ignore it, to let people fix the street lights and the potholes, but you continue sending them rates and taxes bills and expect that they'll continue to pay it. I don't think that's realistic. I think with the e-tolls saga, it has shown a significant risk to the state and to state coffers by people simply not paying taxes. I would advocate for a third approach, and that is to embrace both commercial and community-based involvement. For us in Tshwane, we spearheaded an initiative called Community Upliftment Precincts, where you conclude an agreement either with a residents association or with a civil society organization or with a business community or with a particular business to say, we understand that the state's capacity to do everything that we are constitutionally charged to do is limited. And so we reach this accord, this agreement, where we regulate the relationship between us, and you get to fix the street lights, you get to do the potholes, provided you follow the following specifications. But then you don't just abdicate that fully, because that would be the second approach, just to ignore the collapse. We have to ensure that there is, while you're doing that, while you're opening up to community involvement, while you're opening up the power stations, for example. Pretoria's got 2 power stations that have been mothballed. We wanted to get IPPs in there. There's the Wonderboom National Airport. We want a professional operator of airports to run that. There is the fresh produce market, which can be given on a concession like the city of Cape Town. Instead of us trying to run the fresh produce market, you bring in an operator for 10 years. You can do those things. And then the role of the state becomes important as a regulator and delivering a basic level of services. But forget about the stuff that is not basic. Forget about providing Wi-Fi services and all of these other things, which previous ANC administrations have pretended to be able to provide, but then you can't cut the grass, or you can't fix the sewage lines, or you can't do the bulk services. So it's a reality that we have to navigate, and it's important that if you want to be successful as government, especially in the north of the country, if you want to be a successful mayor in the north of the country, you better be open to offers of cooperation from civil society and government and private business.
Yes. So I wanna make it slightly more personal, and you mentioned, for example, the strikes when you were mayor the previous round, and I remember those strikes very well. It was very big. There was some records in terms of how the biggest strike in the history of the city or something like that. But I remember the streets were literally piling up with rubbish. Like, you would drive in the city and you would just see waste and filth everywhere, which of course was deliberately left there. And a lot of people in the city were talking about you and about what are you going to do? How are you going to deal with the strike? What's the right decision to make? Is it just to play hardball, or is it to cave in? Is it to make a deal? So the question for now is not so much what is the right decision to make, but how does that sort of have a personal impact on you in terms of the stress that you have to go through? What was it like being in that position, seeing the rubbish pile up in the city and knowing that people expect of you to do something about this?
It was dreadful. If you ever wondered what it is like being the mayor, it means that if you drive to the office in the morning, you notice everything that's wrong. You anticipate every criticism, every little stompy, every streetlight that doesn't work. So even without a strike, being the mayor of a city that had been rendered effectively ungovernable by coalition chaos, by intervention of the ANC provincial government in Gauteng, by the malicious conduct of coalition partners, it's a stressful job. Either you're going to reach success or you must move on, but you can't govern under that strain or do work under that strain for an extended period of time. So it was dreadful. But for me, what made it easier was to understand the first principles of the case. And that was quite simply that government's money, including the money to grant salary increases to employees of the municipality, comes from the money that people pay for rates, services, and charges. It comes from the residents of the city. And the economic reality of South Africa is that for the past 15 years, our economy has not been able to exceed the growth of the population. That's if you want Gauteng's urban crunch problem in a sentence, it's that population growth exceeds economic growth. And not even that South Africa's population or that South Africans are that, what is the word, vrugbaar. That South Africans have that. If you compare our population rates to Zimbabwe and Angola, we're closer to the United States.
Yes. Fertile is the word.
Fertile, yes. Yeah. We're not. South Africa aren't that fertile, but we do have a lot of pressure with urbanization and migration. For very long, the Department of Home Affairs has been mismanaged. Our border is in a terrible state. So people come to this country in hope of work opportunities and better services, and they move from the countryside to the cities in hope of that. And what they find in the cities aren't job opportunities, unfortunately, aren't formal job opportunities. And then you get informal settlements mushrooming, theft of electricity, tremendous strain on your infrastructure. And the portion of your city population that pay rates and taxes and charges get smaller and smaller, and the portion of the population that depend on subsidized services become bigger and bigger and bigger. That is the urban crunch on Gauteng metros. And so whenever you talk about just pay the workers or just pay the increases, those increases come from ordinary people. Very similar debate to when the ANC and their supporters were pushing for a VAT increase. That VAT increase comes from ordinary people who are already struggling under circumstances of economic stagnation. And that understanding assisted in giving moral clarity and courage to stare down the violent assault. And I also knew what was at stake, because in the past, the city had caved. There were instances in the past where violent strikes led to the city making payouts to officials. And that had a debilitating effect on labor relations, because immediately, going back to culture, you incentivize violence. You say, we accept, you reward violence. You say, we accept it. If you burn the bus, then you place yourself in a favor. And we had to change that. We had to say, if you burn the bus, we will go after you. We will get you dismissed. we will pursue criminal charges, and there will be absolutely no negotiations until order is restored and people are safe back at work. So that made it easier for me, Ernst. And the other thing that I always mention, because I am not anti-union, I absolutely accept the role of trade unions, maybe a little bit less in the public sphere, because, you essentially negotiating with the people of the country. Those are the employers. But if you look at the municipalities in the Free State, as an example, none of them put in an exemption application. All of them agreed to pay salary increases every year without question. And many of those municipalities couldn't make payroll. They couldn't pay people on time. What is worse, they raided the pension pots of the workers of the municipality to pay operational expenditure. We kept Tshwane out of that position. And I think that kind of a moral clarity gives you the courage to survive, even if at that stage it would have meant Action SA had voted me out earlier.
So before we conclude, I have just one or two more sort of personal questions. One is, so if you are mayor or if you're not mayor, being a sort of a public figure means you get a lot of comments. And what tends to happen is when people support what you're doing, they tend to think that, but they don't necessarily write essays on Facebook and X. When they criticize you, they make sure that you know this. But what would you say, reading social media comments and so forth, about what it's like to be mayor or what it's like running a city and so forth? If there's one thing that you think you would like people to understand, that you think a lot of people looking at what's happening and commenting on what's happening do not understand, what would that be?
Let me just give a quick comment on social media. The Bell Pottinger thing taught many of us in the DA that a lot of what is said on social media, but on X in particular, is driven not by flesh and blood individuals who actually live in the city, but by nano-influencers, people who get paid to have and to spread their opinion, as well as bots. I'm not sure to what extent that has been eradicated, but I suspect that if you look at the parties that are big support on X, for example, in South Africa, if you had to take that and project it onto the election results, this country would have been governed by a coalition of the EFF, Rise, Mzansi, and Action SA. And in fact, those parties are in electoral decline. Even the opinion polls that have got a scientific basis show that they don't really have any significant growth and that they're not really gaining traction with ordinary people. So social media is not a true reflection in all instances of what people actually think. And even when it is, people tend to say things on social media that they would never say to your face. And this includes nice people that you and I know, like
it's like
aunties and uncles.
It's like road rage because there's a distance. You can scream at him. It's the same thing. And many people that have taken me on social media, I found to be very affable when you actually meet them and can explain to them. So what I'd like for folks to understand is that your ward councillor is probably the person in the most difficult position because they are the personification of a system that very often fails. So you know who your ward councillor is in many instances, if it's a good ward councillor, and let's be honest, there are even some bad DA ward councillors, and we're trying our best to get rid of them. But you have their number. You can phone them during office hours. It's not like the municipal call centre that doesn't operate. You've got Facebook groups and broadcast groups and continuous communication in most instances. And so even though a councillor is it's almost like a board where policy input is given and so forth, that's the formal position of a councillor. What is expected nowadays of a councillor is to pick up a lot of the slack of a failing system. So the ward councillor has to be there when a substation burns down, but that ward councillor voted against the budget, which took money away from the upgrading of substations. So they are, if you've at any point felt sorry for me during my tenure as mayor with the strikes and the outbreak of cholera and so forth, the ward councillors are in that position constantly. And it becomes difficult for you to recruit
good people because of the work stress, because people become the shock absorbers. So in essence, my message is that there are good people in politics, that most of us are largely focused on how to fix the system and to deliver value for money. How do you get rid of a corrupt head of tenders? How do you make sure that good businesses put in bids? How do you make sure that the majority of your money goes to substations and water treatment plants and roads? It's not about, planning the next junket or how to enrich yourself. There are obviously a core, and most of them are under the banner of the ANC. But just because there are some of us working in a system that looks like it's failing doesn't mean that we are perpetuating a failing system. In many instances, if it wasn't for our intervention, things would be a whole lot worse.
Yeah. So last question is about time management. I see this in my work, that you wake up every day and you have 1,000 things to do, and an important part of decision making or making progress in what you want to achieve is deciding what you're going to say yes to and what you're going to say no to. And oftentimes when you say no, it upsets people. Some people want you to do A, B, or C, but you believe that you need to do X, Y, and Z. So my question is, from your perspective, how do you manage that personally? But also, what do you think is important to consider in your position, in someone running for mayor, but also in being in that position?
The first important thing to realize is that one's capacity for distraction is unlimited, whereas the capacity to focus and concentrate and make in-depth gains is finite. And once you realize that scarcity, it places things in perspective. And I have nothing original to tell you, Ernst, except for my approach is to identify 5 priorities in my life. And it is not limited to work, because that's the other risk. If you just become about your work, then you become a machine. And we know that there are machines now who are machines. We must be human beings. We must excel as human beings, because the machines are going to take over large parts of our lives in any event. So I essentially have 5 priorities, and they deal with health, with family, also with professional objectives. And then on a weekly basis to identify the actions that will serve those priorities best. And those actions are 2 or 3 things a day. And sometimes they change, because you've got disasters and you've got emergencies, and sometimes you've got to leave a meeting to go pick up the kids from school because, Omar's car doesn't work, or whatever it is. But you have to make sure that there's a causal connection with what you are busy with most of the day and your objectives. And there's a lot of drift. And I learned this from a pretty old hand, Peter Drucker, the father of modern management. And his advice was, start by recording what you actually spend your time on, which can be a difficult exercise because you can tend to project. Like, no, did I really? So if you've got somebody that can help you, not everybody's in a position to do that. If you can have somebody to help you, what do I actually spend my time on? And then to compare that to your objectives and to determine, is there a link between what I'm actually doing and what I want to achieve, and then to make adjustments. But, in the end of the day, as I said, you've got to realize you're a human being. You've got needs. You can't be, I think it's Jordan Peterson who said, be careful of being your own tyrant. You've got to step away from yourself and say, you've got needs. You've got a needs to have a drink sometimes, or to spend time with family, or just do nothing. And tend to those needs. Otherwise, you'll become resentful. And then you no longer enjoy your goals.
Well, that's fantastic. And it's, what's very interesting about that is you mentioned that you have these 5 things. It's exactly the same with me. I also have 5 things that I spend my time on. So it's interesting that it's
5 is a good number. It's like 3.
I'll tell you mine. And I don't spend an equal amount of time. Mine is work, which I spend the most time on. Family, reading, exercise, which I neglect quite a bit, and playing guitar. So my theory is, whenever I'm involved with one of these 5s, I'm doing something that I should be doing, even though that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to spend an equal amount of time on each of them.
That only tells me, Adams, that you are a wealthy man or that you don't care about money. Because to me, managing my finances is one of those important objectives. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. 5 is manageable, and you can also remember them.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Cilliers Brink. Thank you for coming back in for a second interview. And yeah, we look forward to following your career in this and the campaign that lies ahead. And yeah, we'll look forward to supporting you as well.
Great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. If you would like to support this channel and the work that we are doing at Lex Libertas to work toward a more sustainable and a more viable political dispensation for South Africa, I would like to encourage you to sign up as a contributor by clicking on the link in the description.